Before Al-Hirah became this massive, wealthy Arab kingdom caught right between Persia and Arabia, before those famous courts of Lakhmid kings were filled with legendary poets and warriors, there was a man whose story is literally kicked off by betrayal, revenge, and the bloody birth of a brand new dynasty. His name? Amr ibn Adi. In this explainer, we're diving straight into the cinematic, incredible origins of one of late antiquity's most influential Arab kingdoms. Let's get right into it. We're dropping right into the middle of a gripping desert legend here. Picture a young man completely consumed by grief because his uncle was killed in battle. He swears this ruthless, unshakable vow of vengeance. And he actually goes so far that when the killer, a famous queen, takes her own life just to deny him the satisfaction of killing her, he stabs her corpse anyway. I mean, wow. Medieval Arab historians tell us this incredibly raw, violent moment is what set Amr on the path from a grieving nephew to an absolute legend of a king. We are talking about the deep roots of pre-Islamic Arabian warrior culture here. Way before the Lakhmid kings had those highly organized, refined royal courts, there was just Amr, a gritty desert warrior surviving the harsh realities of the 3rd century frontier. It's a story that perfectly blends real historical memory with this incredibly rich Arabian folklore, and it ultimately gives birth to a dynasty that would dominate the region for the next 300 years. Part 1. The World Before Al-Hirah. Okay, so to really grasp how Amr rose to power, we have to look at the absolute geopolitical chessboard of the 3rd century Middle East. You basically have two massive superpowers, the Roman Empire and the Sasanian Persian Empire, locked in this bitter, never-ending rivalry. Now, neither of them could easily control the deep desert, right? So what do? They rely heavily on allied Arab tribal kingdoms to secure their borders. This turns Mesopotamia into a crucial, high-stakes buffer zone. And right in the middle of this tense environment, we see the rise of major tribal alliances, like the Tunnelhids, migrating north and becoming serious power players. Part 2. Legend of the Avenger King. So, the traditional biography we have for Amr, it honestly reads like epic fantasy. Later medieval Arab historians, like al-Tabari, actually claimed that as a kid, Amr was abducted by a jinn, yes, a literal mythological spirit. He's eventually returned to his uncle, the powerful Tanukid king, Jadhima al-Abrash, but adding that supernatural element really shows you just how mythical and revered Amr became in later Arabian storytelling. And this is where the story escalates into pure drama. King Jadhima, Amr's uncle, gets lured into a deadly trap. The architect of this trap is Queen Al-Zabba, who is very often linked in these stories to the famous Zenobia of Palmyra. She reels him in with a totally fake promise of marriage to unite their kingdoms, but instead, she assassinates him right there in her capital. So who is left behind as regent, is completely shattered and absolutely burns for retribution. It's the ultimate double cross and a total cornerstone of pre-Islamic folklore. So, Amr's legendary quest for revenge against Queen Al-Zabba ends in that intense, bloody climax we talked about, after she takes her own life and he strikes her corpse. This massive release of vengeance changes everything. Amr breaks away from the broader Tanakid alliance entirely. He strikes out on his own to establish independent rule. Talk about a dynasty literally forged in blood. And that transition is absolutely crucial. Through this blood-soaked victory, Amr goes from being a vengeful, camp-based warrior to the founding monarch of the Lakhmi dynasty, what's often called the Nasrid royal line. He stops being just a tribal leader and asserts true royal authority, laying the absolute foundation for a structured, enduring kingdom in the desert. Part 3. History versus Arabian myth. Now we have to pause and ask the big question. How much of this cinematic revenge story actually happened? It's fascinating when we put the literary tradition right up against hard historical evidence. On one hand, the old stories give us jinn abductions, dramatic corpse stabbing, and they claim Amr ruled for an impossible 118 years. But on the other hand, modern scholarship points to solid epigraphic proof, like the Sasanian Paikuli inscription from around 293 CE. That stone firmly records Amr of al-Lak as a real, living vassal king with a much more believable 55-year reign. It's a perfect example of how legend inflates the memory of a very real political mastermind. The thing is, our literary knowledge relies so heavily on later medieval historians, guys like Ibn al-Kalbi and al-Masudi, who were writing centuries after all this went down. They were essentially taking deep-rooted Arabian oral traditions and weaving them together with historical memory. So sure, we can't take the jinn stories as literal facts, but historians know that these epic legends almost always preserve the real echoes of actual political shifts and ancient tribal movements. And we definitely have proof to ground those legends. Archaeology gives us inscriptions at al-Jamal that absolutely confirm King Jadhima existed, calling him the king of the Tanukh. Plus, like we mentioned, that Persian Paikuli inscription definitively proves Amr was a real 3rd century ruler. So beneath all the layers of myth and drama, the core cast of characters was 100% real and making moves on the historical stage. Part 4. The Rise of Al-Hirah. Moving beyond the epic tales of revenge, Amr's single most significant, verifiable achievement was setting up his permanent capital. He took his people to the west bank of the Euphrates River and completely resettled the abandoned town of Al-Hirah. This was a massive game changer. He basically took his people from a nomadic, tent-based lifestyle and anchored them into what would become a thriving, sedentary urban center. The ruins there show the beginnings of what would grow into one of the most magnificent cities of late antiquity. And Al-Hirah boomed because of its perfect geography. It was nestled right on the edge between the harsh, open desert and the lush, fertile farmlands of Mesopotamia. Because of that, it turned into this incredible multicultural melting pot. You had Arab-Bedouin tribal culture mixing directly with Christian Aramaic influences. You had Jewish and Persian merchants trading side by side, and famously, it became the absolute epicenter of pre-Islamic Arabic poetry, where the greatest bards flocked to the royal court. Part 5. The Sasanian Vassals. Now, to survive in this incredibly volatile neighborhood, Amr and the kings who followed him had to play it smart. Very smart. They officially aligned themselves with the Sasanian Persian Empire to the east. Essentially, the Lakhmids became the indispensable buffer state for the Persians. They protected the empire's desert borders from nomadic raids, and in return, they acted as the frontline defense against the Byzantines and their own Arab allies, the Ghassanids. This fierce strategic alliance became the absolute bedrock of their power. And the Lakhmids backed up that power with some heavy-hitting mechanics. We're talking a formidable military machine, often bolstered by elite Persian heavy cavalry. They heavily controlled the incredibly lucrative Arabian trade routes and seasonal markets. They even acted as the official tax collectors for the Persian kings. Oh, and my personal favorite piece of ancient realpolitik? They would literally hold the sons of rebellious tribal chiefs hostage. It forced the tribes to comply, while basically acting as a mandatory training camp for the next generation of leaders. Pretty shrewd, right? Part 6. Legacy of the Lakhmids. This powerful kingdom held its ground for over 300 years. Amr started it, and later kings like Imru al-Qais massively expanded it. He's even called King of all the Arabs on a famous inscription from 328 CE. But the whole thing came crashing down due to a massive miscalculation. In 602 CE, the Sasanian Emperor Khosrow II inexplicably deposed and executed the last Lakhmid king, Numan III. That terrible decision completely shattered the Arab buffer zone. It directly led to the Arabs defeating the Persians at the Kar in 604 and set the stage perfectly for the Islamic conquest of Iraq just a few decades later. But here's the amazing part. The story doesn't end when the kingdom falls. Al-Hirah's legacy was so profound that it deeply shaped the early Islamic world. Its brilliant urban culture, its complex administrative systems, and its massive influence on Arabic poetry survived. In fact, when the early Muslims built the garrison city of Kufa right nearby, they essentially built it directly upon the cultural and administrative foundations that Al-Hirah had laid down over the centuries. That influence is literally still felt in the Middle East today. So we have to ask ourselves, was Amr ibn Adi just the grieving, legendary avenger we see in folklore? Or was he a deeply shrewd political architect who built an empire? Honestly, he stands right at the mesmerizing crossroads between the two. Whether you remember him through the lens of a dramatic Arabian epic or as the geopolitical mastermind of late antiquity, his legacy undeniably altered the course of Middle Eastern history. So what do you think? Legend or mastermind? Keep that in mind as you explore the fascinating depths of the ancient world.